This is your Daily Companion, 7 to 9, Cape Pulpit. Always a privilege to be speaking to author and pastor Afrika. And once again, the man has written a very intriguing book, Freed by God but Imprisoned by Culture. Afrika, good afternoon and welcome to Cape Pulpit.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, let us talk about your new book.
Yes.
It is, just the title is rather interesting.
Yeah.
And this is the thing with you. You write books that are intriguing. You write books that are slightly controversial, right?
Yes. Not that, of course, I'm seeking controversy, but dealing with stuff that by itself is a very controversial issue. My first book was Christianity and the Veneration of Ancestors. And the subtitle was saying, should a Christian consult the dead? And this one is a follow-up to that, Freed by God, but Imprisoned by Culture. Because essentially, we are all cultural prisoners, one way or the other.
And now you have to explain that.
First, the culture, we have to define what it is. Typically, your English dictionary will tell us culture is a way of life. The question that must now follow that is a way of life according to who? In other words, who determines that? Who comes out with that way of life as your culture? And then I conclude that culture is nothing else but you and I being governed by dead people, is being ruled by dead people. Because you don't start culture, you only follow it. Culture is started by few, but followed by many. So those who started the culture, and a lot of people don't buy into the idea, but it is actually historically true that culture is a man-made construct. Culture is not made in heaven, it's made on earth. That's why culture is different, because it takes the shape of the people who founded it, and it's based on the context and the environment that they were dealing with at the time. And so to follow a cultural system in an environment that has changed from the environment from which it was founded is a type of imprisonment.
Okay, now that is Afrika for you, right? I'm already starting with heavy stuff. Now, Afrika, in your book, there's obviously in the contents page, I'm just having a quick browse here. And you say that we need to understand where we come from.
Yes.
For us to be unimprisoned.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we make a big mistake of is when we talk about retracing our history or going back to our past, people always talking about let's go back to our roots. And that's the question, how far do we go? Because if we go back far enough, we would go back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. That's our common parent ancestors. So people conveniently go far back up till a few hundred years and they stop there. But your search for who you are doesn't stop a few hundred years ago or when your historical knowledge ends, when your data ends. You do not just originate from 1600 years ago from some ancestor. That person also originates from someone, and that person, and so on and so on and so on, until we get back to Adam. Now, we have to go back to the Bible and see what was God's intention for creating mankind in the Garden of Eden. And it makes it very clear in verse 26 of Genesis 1. Let's make man our image and let him dominion over the fish of the sea. And when it talks about this idea of creating man, two things you'd notice there. One, he doesn't define man as black and white. He just defines him as man. Because black or white are not spiritual terms. They're not God's terms. They're social political terms. They're man-made terms to serve a political purpose. They have nothing to do with what God says. God never speaks to you as a black or white person. That's one. So therefore, the idea of blackness or whiteness is man-made, and therefore you are born into it, and therefore you are forced to follow that idea, even though you do not subscribe to it. So you're born with a certain skin color, already with a preconditioned or predetermined idea of what it means to be black. And you have no participation or views on that. You're supposed to just follow it. Why?
Why? That's a very good question. Why? I mean, we come into this world and we are human beings.
Exactly.
And then at some point, we then start to see the race, so to speak.
Yeah.
And this is where then our culture, obviously as black people, it's even worse. But why is that, Afrika?
It's because you have to understand specifically African culture. First off, let me just go back. When a person is born doesn't know he's black or white, people tell him that. Within that, they have their own ideas of what it means to be black or white. Now, if we look at the two cultural systems that are dominant in South Africa, the European system and the African system, the European kind of culture, the society, the individual defines society, and African culture, society defines the individual. So in African culture, being a communal culture, you are defined by society. In European culture, the individual defines society. So it's the other way around. So in African culture, there's no promotion of an individual opinion, but acceptance of a general opinion. So you're forced to live within that. And so you have to follow where the crowd is going. You have to be like a sheep and follow that. And so then when we speak the things I'm speaking, we seem to be rebels or whatever. Or we are told that you're a lost generation. And I ask the question, lost from who? Because you can only be lost from what owned you. And culture doesn't own me. In the Bible, Jesus makes 3 parables of lost things: lost coin, lost sheep, and lost talent. And something is lost only when it's no longer in the presence of the one who owned it. So when you call me a lost generation, lost from who? Because I wasn't owned by culture. So you can only be lost from something if it owned you before. Human beings are only lost when they're away from God who made them, not from a man-made idea called culture.
Afrika, I have to ask, you're now in Cape Town to obviously promote your book.
Yeah.
When you speak to people,
Yes.
and you give them this, what you've just given me, right?
Okay.
What is the reaction?
Yeah, firstly, I think I've long been divorced from the idea that people's opinion define who I am. They don't. One, I operate under the idea that I'm here to obey a divine mandate. And so, as much as I'm not deliberately seeking controversy or being arrogant in my views or being confrontational either, I'm not. If people seek the truth, they will find that what I say, they need to challenge me to prove it in Scripture. Because that's the base, that's the manual of life for me. And so if I can't prove it, then I have no right to say it. But most of what I've said, I could prove it in Scripture.
For somebody that picks up this book, what are you expecting them to gain from it?
I'm expecting them to be liberated from imprisonment of man-made ideas revolving around culture. I'm expecting them to know that from the beginning of time, there's a God in heaven who made you in his image and put you on earth to dominate the earth on his behalf, that you're God's manager over the earth. You're the steward of divine mandate. And that you can know everything else, but if you don't know that divine mandate, you're a lost person. Because you're only occupying space, you're consuming air. You're just a statistic until you discover that original purpose to which you are called for. You're taking a stroll, you have not lived life yet. And when you discover what you are in him, not what I say, when you discover what you are in him, you connect to that which he created you for. Then you can take from different ethnic, because these are ethnic-based cultural systems, you can take from them what still would be compatible with your walk with God and discard the rest and not be sentimental about it. If it doesn't work, if it's in contradiction with your value system in God's kingdom, you discard it. You pay more loyalty to what God says you are than what people say you are.
All right, Afrika, we're going to carry on this conversation. There's a few questions that I have to ask you, and we'll definitely continue that conversation. But Afrika, for those that want to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Again, I'm available obviously on the social media platforms, on Facebook or Twitter. I'm Afrika with a K, Afrika Mhlope. I'm not Afrika with a C. And secondly, they can always drop me an email at info@africam, again with a K, info@africam.co.za.
Awesome. Thank you very much.